Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating tension that's actively shaping our modern world. We're looking at the incredibly complex relationship between an increasingly connected globe and our fundamental human protections. Okay, let's dive right into this. So, think about it. Is globalization the ultimate threat to human rights, or is it actually their greatest opportunity? It's a huge question, right? And it really challenges our basic assumptions about the forces connecting the globe today. As we'll see, the answer is incredibly nuanced, and it all comes back to the one entity we often love to criticize, the territorial state. Let's start things off with Section 1, the Globalization Challenge. We're going to look at what this phenomenon actually means for the traditional state. First up, we got to define our terms. The text defines globalization as the creation of structures and processes that span the entire globe, making ideas, markets, and politics transnational rather than just national. You know, it's a buzzword we hear literally all the time, but getting this definition straight from our source material establishes a really solid factual baseline for us. At its core, it's fundamentally about boundaries dissolving. Now here's kind of a wild fact. We usually think of globalization as a product of the internet or modern air travel, right? But listen to this striking quote from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, written all the way back in 1848. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeois over the whole surface of the globe. The economic drive behind globalization actually has roots that are centuries deep. Today, though, the pace has dramatically accelerated, and it places the modern state in a serious squeeze. It's a real pressure cooker. On one side, you have the challenge from above, where these massive multinational businesses and global organizations dictate economies, forcing states to lose control. But equally, we have the challenge from below. Think of regional autonomy movements, like Catalonia in Spain or Scotland in the UK, demanding localization. The state is literally trapped right in the middle. So, how exactly do people bypass their own governments? Well, we can look at this really brilliant concept called the boomerang model. It shows step by step how technology allows citizens to bypass their state. Step 1, local actors, like indigenous groups in the Americas, face a hostile or indifferent state. Step 2, they use global communication to direct appeals to transnational networks. And step 3, those global networks then pressure the state from the outside. They essentially throw the issue out to the globe, and the pressure boomerangs right back to the local government. But, it's not just activists who benefit from these networks. There is absolutely a darker side to these global flows. Information and transportation technologies also empower forces that completely circumvent state regulation. The source text lists some pretty sobering examples of this: transnational crime, human trafficking, sex tourism, terrorism radicalization via social media, and the rise of white nationalism. These are all global processes operating entirely outside the traditional control of the state. All right, that brings us to Section 2, the state's dual role, where we find a really fascinating paradox at the heart of human rights advocacy.
Here is the ultimate paradox for you. The state is simultaneously the principal violator and the principal protector of human rights. Human rights advocates have spent decades fighting against state abuses. Yet, counterintuitively, the territorial state remains the only historical entity actually capable of protecting individual rights, especially when we're talking about economic and social guarantees. And that is absolutely crucial for all of us relying on those protections.
Let's explore exactly how this tension plays out economically in Section 3, Markets versus Welfare States. We're looking at a pretty fundamental clash here. On the one hand, we have free markets. They're designed to seek economic efficiency and maximize aggregate growth. But they do this by ignoring individual needs. They optimize for this abstract average person. On the other hand, we have welfare states. Their entire purpose is to redistribute resources to ensure that real, flesh-and-blood individuals are guaranteed economic and social rights, totally regardless of their market value.
Because of this gap, the welfare state essentially has to act as a vital shock absorber. It takes the often ruthless efficiency of free markets and embeds it into a framework of economic and social human rights. Basically, it compensates society's most vulnerable who get harmed by that market efficiency. But remember that globalization squeeze we talked about earlier? Well, highly mobile offshore capital is currently threatening this exact safety net.
Now, let's untangle a really common misconception in Section 4, elections versus human rights. This brings us to a distinction people confuse all the time. Electoral democracy basically answers who should rule. It empowers the majority to pursue the collective good. Human rights, however, answers how to rule. It sets the strict, uncrossable boundaries needed to protect individuals and minorities against the tyranny of that exact same majority. It's a super important separation to keep in mind when you're watching global events unfold.
It's so vital to remember that democratization isn't just a straight line. The source text breaks political progress down into 3 distinct levels. First up is liberalization. This is just a decrease in human rights violations and opening up political space, kind of like Poland in the 1980s. Second is democratization, which means establishing electoral democracy and fair elections. But look at the example the text provides, Egypt post-2011 Arab Spring. Egypt had free elections that brought Mohamed Morsi to power, which was followed by intense protests, a military coup, and then referenda and elections installing Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, under whom human rights have severely deteriorated. It objectively proves that just holding elections doesn't automatically get you to the 3rd level, a truly rights-protective regime.
Actually, elections can sometimes create a total illusion of safety. The authors impartially observe that without robust rights-protective institutions, electoral democracy can sometimes empower right-wing populist movements, or it can validate harsh structural adjustment programs, like the ones pushed by the IMF in the 80s and 90s. Those programs led to drastic cuts in education and health, which directly harmed the economic rights of the poor.
So, where do we go from here? Let's jump to our final section, forging a new alliance, and look at the potential tactical solutions to all these immense global pressures. The path forward outlined in the text basically leans on that old saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." We're seeing a really surprising tactical alliance forming right now. Non-governmental organizations, civil society groups, and certain state elites actually share a common interest, controlling the immense unchecked power of multinational businesses. To protect the welfare state and human rights, these historically opposed groups, the activists and the state, are finding they might actually need each other to rein in global markets.
Which leaves us with one seriously daunting question. Can states and citizens actually successfully cooperate to humanize global markets? Think about it. The state, the very institution human rights advocates have fought against for decades, might literally be the only mechanism left with the power to protect our economic and social rights against the forces of globalization. The fight for human rights isn't just about limiting the state anymore, it might actually be about saving it. How that new alliance functions in the real world is the next great human rights frontier. Definitely something to think on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.